talking about here is it in Ukraine's interest? Is it in Europe's interest? It certainly isn't in Russia's interest or in the American people's interest for this war to grind on forever and ever and ever. So a key part of his conversation was helping President Zelensky understand this war needs to come to an end. This kind of open-ended mantra that we've had under the Biden administration, that's over. And I think a lot of people are having a hard time accepting that. And then the other piece is there's been discussions from Prime Minister Starmer and also President Macron about European-led security guarantees. We welcome that. We've been asking Europe to step up and secure its own prosperity, safety, and security. So we certainly welcome that, and we certainly welcome more European assistance. As I told my counterparts, come to the table with more if you want a bigger seat at the table. And we've been asking for that for quite some time.
Sanctions in your talks with them, and have you consulted with international partners and allies about potentially rolling back sanctions in these negotiations to end the war?
The talks with our Russian counterparts, both with my counterpart, the National Security Advisor, Secretary Rubio's counterpart, the Foreign Minister Lavrov, you know, it really was quite broad, focused on what is the goals for our broader relationship. But very clear that the fighting has to stop to get to any of those brighter goals. And as a first step, we're just going to do some common sense things like restore the ability of both of our embassies to function. And again, you know, this is common sense. In foreign policy world, they call it shuttle diplomacy. We have to talk to both sides in order to get to both sides to the table. And both sides have said only President Trump can do that.
Deanna.
All right.
The president has called Zelensky a dictator. Does he view Putin as a dictator? And does he want Zelensky out of power? I know he's called for elections. And then thirdly, the head of the Defense Committee in Ukraine's parliament just has claimed that the U.S. has stopped selling weapons to Ukraine. Is that true?
Well, most of our weapons that have gone to Ukraine have been part of a drawdown authority where we've literally taken them out of our stocks and then eventually through appropriations started buying them again to refill our stocks. I'll just state that there has been a lag in a lot of that process. So many of our stocks, as we look at our operations around the world, are becoming more depleted. That's one of the reasons many people have had a lot of concern about when does this end? How much is it going to take? How many lives will be lost? How much will we spend? As a member of Congress, we repeatedly asked the Biden administration those questions, and we never got a satisfactory answer. Look, President Trump is obviously very frustrated right now with President Zelensky. The fact that he hasn't come to the table, that he hasn't been willing to take this opportunity that we have offered. I think he eventually will get to that point, and I hope so very quickly. But President Trump is, as we made clear to our Russian counterparts, and I want to make clear today, he's focused on stopping the fighting and moving forward. And we can argue all day long about what's happened in the past.
Reagan.
Yeah, what about
Oh, the iron. Excuse me, I just called on Reagan. Reagan, go ahead.
I have a question for Stephen and a question for Mike.
Sure.
Stephen, I can start with you. There have been reports that Trump is unhappy with the rate of deportations and he wants them to be higher. Is the president happy with the rate of deportations, and are there any plans to speed up the process?
Well, first of all, we all appreciate the encouragement from the media to deport as many illegal aliens as humanly possible. So thank you, and I will promise you that the full might of the Department of Homeland Security, the Department of Justice, the Department of Defense, and every element and instrument of national power will be used to remove, with speed, all criminal illegals from the soil of the United States of America, to enforce final removal orders, and to ensure that this country is for American citizens and those who legally belong in this country. We inherited an ICE that was completely shuttered. We inherited a Department of Homeland Security whose sole mission was to resettle illegal aliens within the United States of America. In 30 days, the president sealed the border shut, declared the cartels to be terrorist organizations, has increased ICE deportations to levels not seen in decades, and we are shortly on the verge of achieving a pace and speed of deportations this country has never before seen. Thank you.
And Mike, there are reports that there's some underground opposition to Trump's pick for Undersecretary of Defense and Policy, Elbridge Colby. Have you or anyone from the administration been personally lobbying senators to support Elbridge Colby?
Look, I've worked with Bridge Colby in the past. He has the president's full support to be the Undersecretary of Policy, which will be a critical policy arm for Secretary Hegseth going forward that will implement a lot of these policies. And really, that's been to the extent of it. I think there's been a lot of kind of, breathless, back and forth in the press, but we're full speed ahead to get the president's team in place so we can implement his America First policy.
Thank you. Mike has spoken pretty extensively. Does anybody have questions for Stephen or for Mr. Hassett? Nobody wants to talk about the economy? Yeah, sure. IRS, okay. Go ahead.
For either one of you. So we reported, several other outlets have reported that about 3,500 people are due to be lose their jobs at the IRS by the end of the week. If the goal of these spending cuts across the federal government has been to reduce the debt, why impose some of the deepest cuts we've seen so far at the agency responsible for raising revenue for the federal government?
Well, I think our objective is to make sure that the employees that we pay are being productive and effective. And there are many, more than 100,000 people working to collect taxes, and not all of them are fully occupied. And the Treasury Secretary is studying the matter and feels like 3,500 is a small number, and probably can get bigger, especially as we improve the IT at the IRS. And so I think that it's absolutely something that is on the table for good reasons. And the point is that don't just talk about the IRS, talk about all of government. That there are so many places. I live in DC. You maybe live in DC where nobody's going to the buildings. People aren't commuting because nobody's doing their job. We look back and we see that there are all these people doing 2 jobs while they're getting a government payroll on the payroll. So the point is we're fixing that, and the IRS is a small part of that picture.
So you're saying that everybody who's being let go was doing a bad job?
I'm saying that we're studying every agency and deciding who to let go and why. And we're doing so very rationally with a lot of support from analysis.
Because we're being told by a lot of people who have been let go at other agencies that they were told they were being dismissed because of poor performance, when in some cases they haven't even had a performance review yet because they've only been on the job a couple of months.
Yeah, I've never seen a person who was laid off for poor performance to say that they were performing poorly. Okay.
Carolyn?
Good point. Sure, Kate.
I have a question. I'll start with you, Kevin Hassett. Thank you for being here. And then I've got a question for Mr. Waltz. On these potential checks that you might send out from Doge, is there a concern as you're thinking through this that they could be inflationary?
Oh, absolutely not, because imagine if we don't spend government money and we give it back to people, then if they spend it all, then you're even. But they're probably going to save a lot of it, in which case you're reducing inflation. And also, when the government spends a lot, that's what creates inflation. We learned that from Joe Biden. And so if we reduce government spending, then that's, reduces inflation. And if you give people money, then they're going to save a bunch of it. And when they save it, then that also reduces demand and reduces inflation.
Okay, so you're not worried about it. And
No,
Mr.
no.
Waltz, to follow up on Peter's question, you wrote in an op-ed in the fall of 2023 that, quote, Putin is to blame, certainly like Al-Qaeda was to blame for 9/11. Do you still feel that way now, or do you share the president's assessment as he says Ukraine is to blame for the start of this war?
Well, it shouldn't surprise you that I share the president's assessment on all kinds of issues. What I wrote as a member of Congress was as a former member of Congress. Look, what I share the president's assessment on is that the war has to end. And what comes with that? What comes with that should be, at some point, elections. What comes with that should be peace. What comes with that is prosperity that we've just offered in this natural resources and economic partnership arrangement, an end to the killing, and European security and security for the world. The president's not only
Bon, appelé
determined to do that in Europe, he's determined to do it in the Middle East. And just a few months ago, we had an administration that had tried for 15 months, week after week, sitting with you here and couldn't get us to a ceasefire, couldn't get our hostages out. Now we're at that point. We're back to the maximum pressure on Iran, and we will we have just begun, and we will drive towards a ceasefire and all of those other steps. I'm not going to pre-negotiate or get ahead of the sequencing of all of that. It's a very delicate situation. But this is a president of peace, and who here would argue against peace?
Okay, so you do share that assessment. And can I follow up? In 2017, then President Trump, can I just follow up
Thank
really
you.
You
quick?
just had 2 questions, Katie.
Meg, can I just go ahead?
Mr.
I have an important
Hassett.
follow-up.
Jordan,
for my
go ahead.
So, Mr. Hassett, you were speaking about tariff revenue, and you also addressed a question about the IRS. President Trump has spoken about replacing income tax with tariff revenue, especially with all this waste, fraud, and abuse that we're seeing cut. Is that a possibility?
Absolutely, and in fact, if you think about the China tariff revenue that we're estimating is coming in from the 10% that we just added, plus the de minimis thing, that it's between $500 billion and $1 trillion over 10 years is our estimate. And that's something that is outside of the reductions that markets are seeing through the negotiations up on the Hill. And so we expect that the tariff revenue is actually going to make it much easier for Republicans to pass a bill, and that was the president's plan all along.
And I have a question for Steve Miller about Doge. So you spoke about Doge. You said roughly $50 billion is set to be cut in a year of waste, fraud, and abuse by unelected bureaucrats. We're hearing this ironic narrative from the president's critics and the left-wing media that Elon Musk is an unelected bureaucrat and he's doing all this terrible stuff. Isn't one of Doge's objectives to get rid of the federal bureaucracy, the deep state, and also who was running the White House when Joe Biden was in office? Because I don't know a single person who believes it was Joe Biden.
You're tempting me to say some very harsh things about some of our media friends. Yes, it is true that many of the people in this room for 4 years failed to cover the fact that Joe Biden was mentally incompetent and was not running the country. It is also true that many people in this room who have used this talking point that Elon is not elected fail to understand how government works. So I'm glad for the opportunity for a brief civics lesson. A president is elected by the whole American people. He's the only official in the entire government that is elected by the entire nation, right? Judges are appointed, members of Congress are elected at the district or state level, which is one man. And the Constitution, Article 2, has a clause known as the vesting clause, and it says the executive power shall be vested in a president, singular. The whole will of democracy is in
Madame, Monsieur, voilà, nous juste faisons camper avec ensemble de déclarations qui t'ont sorti depuis Maison Blanche pour que nous t'ayons fait le propos autour de ensemble de déclarations. Ça y est, représentant l'administration Trump fait comprendre que non seulement Biden était incompétent, mais il était malade mental, donc il n'y a pas de bien contrôle de ce qui a passé au niveau. Il n'y a pas de bien contrôle de ce qui a passé au niveau pouvoir là. Donc c'était une situation que ça n'a pas été aussi. Ok, nous sommes obligés de camper avec la déclaration ça pour nous dire que il a annoncé que l'autorité ukrainienne a dû profiter de avantages que offrir au venir sous table de négociation. Pourtant, selon l'information que sortie en Ukraine, pas de aucune invitation par qui était lancée à l'autorité ukrainienne pour participer dans cette table qui fait dans l'Arabie Saoudite, dans Riyad particulièrement. Volodymyr Zelensky lit qu'un sauvage qu'elle t'a fait parce qu'elle disait pas associé à démagogie qui a fait l'autre bois. Maison Blanche qualifié chef d'État a qualifié Volodymyr Zelensky de dictateur qui pas voulu faire élection. Lui aussi dit c'est lui-même qui était commencé guerre là pendant que tout le monde connaît c'est Vladimir Poutine avec la Russie qui était commencé guerre ça contre Ukraine. Chef d'État a fait comprendre que il y a travail sur tout et que si Ukraine pas d'accord pour lui venir négocier pour le perdre du terrain que lui perdre du qui n'a la Russie donc la préserver pour contre lui en pile déclaration concernant Ukraine. Et puis dans ça qui a un rapport avec Israël gagne Hamas qui te promet pour libérer une quantité de citoyens parmi eux 4 cadavres autorité responsable Hamas livré à autorité israélienne 4 cadavres ça dont 2 timoun ensemble avec une personne qui a 88 ans monsieur qui dit qu'on travaille pour la paix dans zone centrale et un peacekeeper et bien monsieur perdu la ville dans Menek Hamas puisque donc série de négociations déjà il était promettre pour être libéré monsieur négociation te échoué à cause de position Israël, mais qu'on y a pour te cadavre là-bas, il pas venu avec monsieur vivant. Donc ça, on dit en soulevé colère, population israélienne et autorité autour, qui s'est monté faut que venger sans citoyen ça que Amasalité mettait à terre monsieur qui 88 l'année plus 2 petits moun petit qui étaient ensemble avec lui. Donc situation il y a une famille là qui dans deuil qui pas gagné un seul deuil à gérer mais c'est tout la gérer dans moi n'a pas avec vous là. Et puis, gagner un peu avec cette qui annonce les couleurs, monsieur dit, on a joué ça là, on a fait ce maintenant, là, commencé à révoquer une quantité générale ensemble l'autre gros employé au que ministère de la Guerre, monsieur dit, il faut sauver l'économie américaine, il va dépenser l'argent devant des. Donc, c'est comme ça, situation liée dans ça qui concerne une série d'informations, tant qu'Israël, Iran, ensemble avec Ukraine, Palestine, donc gagner tout Irak, États-Unis pour nous citer ça seulement. Nous espérons un peu plus tard pour nous partager avec vous plus d'informations pour